During a family dinner one weekend, my mother said, "Your grandfather has dementia, so your father and I have decided to move him into a nursing home. What do you think?" I replied, "Then let Grandpa move in with me." 1 month later, he revealed that he had a $1.5 million savings fund. Immediately, my parents showed up with a lawyer demanding half of the money. But then, my name is Marcia Vance. I am 29 years old, and at 9:00 on a freezing snow-covered Monday morning, I sat inside a downtown Louisville law office, watching my own parents attempt to strip away everything my grandfather had built. Across the polished conference table, my father sat with a cold, calculated smirk, while my mother avoided my gaze, hiding behind their high-priced attorney. They thought my 29-year-old self would freeze under legal pressure and hand over my grandfather's life savings. They believed that his fading memory made him an easy target to exploit, and that my quiet nature meant I would surrender without a fight. But they completely miscalculated who was truly protecting whom. Sitting beside my grandfather, holding a worn iron box filled with decades of undeniable proof, I knew this was no longer just a dispute over a financial trust. It was an all-out war for his dignity, and I was fully prepared to burn every bridge to win it. If you want to see how this intense family battle unfolds and discover who ultimately prevails, please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode of our story. In September of that year, before the first snowstorms of the season blanketed Louisville, my family was still desperately trying to maintain a delusional illusion of peace. Every Sunday evening, I was expected to drive over to the suburban house where I grew up, sitting through tense family meals that felt more like business negotiations than affectionate gatherings. My father, Vincent Vance, sat at the head of the dining table with a heavy scowl, aggressively cutting his roast beef, while barely concealing his lingering frustration over his failing business ventures. Across from him, my mother, Anita Vance, nervously adjusted her polished silver jewelry, constantly casting uneasy glances toward the quiet corner of the dining room. Sitting there peacefully was my grandfather, Lyle Vance, an 81-year-old retired civil engineer who had spent 4 decades designing the very bridges that connected our city, now reduced in their eyes to a minor inconvenience, simply because his aging mind occasionally misplaced his house keys or forgot to turn off the coffee maker. Throughout the meal, the atmosphere inside the dining room grew increasingly oppressive as my parents exchanged coded looks before finally launching into their prepared speech. My father slammed his fork down against the fine porcelain plate, complaining loudly about the rising monthly electricity bills and the exhausting burden of keeping a watchful eye on an elderly relative who required constant attention. My mother immediately chimed in, using a carefully practiced tone of fake sympathy to explain that they had spent the past week researching facilities and had officially found a budget-friendly nursing home located in an isolated rural township far outside the Louisville metropolitan area. She claimed it was the most reasonable solution for everyone involved, arguing that shifting his daily care to low-cost institutional staff would dramatically reduce their personal financial strain while keeping him properly secured. Listening to them discuss my grandfather as if he were an obsolete piece of machinery ready to be discarded made my blood run cold. I looked over at Grandpa Lyle, whose weathered hands trembled slightly as he pushed his green peas around his plate, clearly understanding that his own son and daughter-in-law were actively plotting to push him out of their lives. I refused to let them destroy his remaining dignity for the sake of their convenience. Setting my napkin down firmly, I told my parents directly that their cold plan was entirely unacceptable, declaring that I was taking immediate responsibility for his daily care and moving him into my own home that very night. My father snorted in disbelief, warning me that taking in an elderly man with early-stage dementia would ruin my social life and drain my modest income as a landscape designer, but I ignored his bitter insults, helped Grandpa Lyle pack his essential clothes, and guided him out to my old sedan. The quiet transition into October brought a profound sense of warmth and stability to my cozy 2-bedroom home that my grandfather had not experienced in years. Away from the constant criticism and hostile environment of my parents' house, his anxiety visibly melted away, allowing his gentle personality and sharp wit to resurface during our quiet morning routines. We established a peaceful rhythm together, where he would sit by the sunlit kitchen window sipping black coffee while I sketched landscape designs before heading out to my project sites. The familiar surroundings and respectful treatment worked wonders for his mental clarity, keeping his memory remarkably sharp and his spirits consistently high as the autumn leaves began to turn golden across the neighborhood. One crisp October morning while we were sitting together after breakfast, Grandpa Lyle reached under his bed and pulled out a heavy rusted iron box that he had kept carefully hidden inside an old leather suitcase. He placed it gently onto the wooden kitchen table, sliding it toward me with a serious yet deeply affectionate look in his eyes. When I opened the latched lid, I was stunned to find meticulous bank ledgers, original land deed certificates, and official financial trust documents establishing a private account valued at $1.5 million. He softly explained that he had spent his entire professional career quietly building this fund from his engineering salary, land sales, and my late grandmother's life insurance payout, intentionally structuring it to cover his future medical expenses while ensuring that the remaining wealth would eventually pass directly to me. As I stared at the incredible sum detailed on the certified papers, I realized that my grandfather had placed his complete faith and entire life's legacy in my hands, unaware that the sheer existence of this fortune would soon ignite a ruthless firestorm of greed within our family. By early November, as crisp autumn winds swept through downtown Louisville, I decided to formally resolve the administrative details regarding my grandfather's ongoing healthcare arrangements. Accompanied by Grandpa Lyle, I drove to the main branch of Heritage Bank to schedule an appointment with Opal Kent, the trust manager at Heritage Bank, who oversaw specialized family accounts. Sitting inside her quiet, glass-walled office, I presented the original trust documents from the iron box so we could officially update his primary medical proxy records. Opal Kent reviewed the certified filings with practiced efficiency, confirming that the $1.5 million principal remained fully intact under his name. She guided us through the necessary verification procedures, ensuring that my grandfather retained total authority over his financial affairs while designating me as his authorized representative for all future healthcare billing decisions. Because Grandpa Lyle had never updated his primary mailing address since relocating to my house, the bank's automated security system generated a routine physical confirmation letter and mailed it directly to his former residence. 2 days later, the peaceful sanctuary of my home was violently shattered when my father barged through my front door without knocking, holding the opened bank statement in his trembling fist. My mother hurried in right behind him, her face flushed with fury, accompanied by Floyd Finch, an aggressive asset recovery attorney known throughout the city for handling ruthless high-stakes inheritance disputes. My father paced across my living room floor, shouting that I had deliberately manipulated an aging man into hiding a massive fortune while leaving his own hard-working parents in financial jeopardy. Floyd Finch stepped forward with an arrogant grin, tossing a stack of binding legal contracts onto my coffee table and demanding that I sign them immediately. He explained that the drafted agreement would divide the trust fund equally, transferring $750,000 into my parents' bank account, while establishing a joint conservatorship over the remaining balance. When I flatly refused to sign the documents, my mother stepped toward me, her voice trembling with intense bitterness as she accused me of stealing what she claimed was rightful family property. Floyd Finch leaned over my kitchen counter, warning me that if I failed to execute the agreement by the end of the week, he would file a formal lawsuit in the Marion County Probate Court. He threatened to accuse me of severe emotional manipulation, elder financial exploitation, and unlawful coercion, claiming he had enough circumstantial evidence to convince a judge that Grandpa Lyle lacked mental capacity when he handed over the records. My father added that they would seek an emergency court order to freeze the trust completely, stripping my grandfather of his medical funds and forcing him into an involuntary state guardianship if I dared to resist their demands. Grandpa Lyle stood up from his armchair, his voice steady as he told his son that the money was his own lifetime savings and that he trusted me entirely to protect it. My father sneered at him, dismissing his words as mere parroting of my instructions, and claiming that his early-stage dementia rendered his opinions legally meaningless. The sheer disrespect in my father's tone ignited a fierce protective resolve within me, making it crystal clear that any lingering hope of familial compromise was officially dead. I picked up the unsigned legal papers from the table, handed them back to Floyd Finch, and firmly ordered all three of them to vacate my property before I called the Louisville Metro Police Department to report an active trespass. Floyd Finch gathered his briefcase with a dark chuckle, promising that my defiance would cost me every dollar I possessed once we stood before a probate judge. As they slammed the front door behind them, leaving my living room in heavy silence, I looked at Grandpa Lyle's pale face and vowed that no amount of intimidation would ever force me to surrender his freedom. By the following Tuesday morning, my parents had turned our internal family disagreement into a public spectacle on social media. My father drafted an exaggerated narrative and published it across multiple community forums, publicly accusing me of manipulating a vulnerable relative to isolate him from his family. He claimed that I had secretly coaxed an elderly man into handing over his lifelong savings, characterizing my actions as an ungrateful betrayal designed to strip away his legitimate inheritance. The post gained rapid traction among local groups, prompting harsh commentary from distant acquaintances who blindly accepted his version of the story. Soon after, suspicious vehicles began idling along my street, and several neighbors started whispering whenever I walked outside to collect the morning mail. Despite the emotional strain of these relentless public attacks, I maintained my composure, knowing that reacting impulsively would only validate their fabrications. I focused entirely on maintaining a quiet, stable environment for Grandpa Lyle, shielding him from the distressing online rumor mill while keeping his daily routine peaceful and uninterrupted. Recognizing that informal resistance was no longer sufficient against their mounting hostility, I scheduled an urgent consultation with Verna Drake, a top elder law attorney in Louisville who specialized in protecting vulnerable seniors from domestic financial abuse. I arrived at her office on Meridian Street carrying a binder containing our medical logs, bank records, and printed copies of my father's slanderous internet posts. Verna Drake reviewed the materials with a calm, discerning eye, carefully examining the timeline of my grandfather's relocation and his verified trust fund documentation. She assured me that my parents' public campaign was a transparent, desperate intimidation tactic aimed at coercing an out-of-court settlement before formal judicial scrutiny took place. She explained that Kentucky probate judges evaluated capacity based on rigorous medical evaluations rather than sensationalized online claims, noting that our evidence clearly demonstrated a pattern of voluntary, deliberate estate planning by my grandfather. To construct an ironclad legal defense, Verna Drake outlined a comprehensive strategic action plan designed to neutralize Floyd Finch's upcoming court petitions. She instructed me to coordinate with Grandpa Lyle's primary geriatric physician to secure a formal competency assessment documenting his exact cognitive status through standardized neurological testing. Furthermore, she directed me to assemble a detailed chronological ledger tracking every dollar expended on his daily living expenses, groceries, prescription medications, and physical therapy sessions since he moved into my home. To immediately stop the malicious public campaign, she drafted an urgent cease and desist order, along with a motion for an emergency restraining order against my parents, serving notice that any further defamation or harassment would result in immediate civil liability and court sanctions. Working alongside Verna Drake gave me a renewed sense of confidence, transforming my defensive panic into a focused, highly organized legal counteroffensive. Over the following days, I gathered signed affidavits from my grandfather's treating physicians who unanimously confirmed that his decision to appoint me as his trustee occurred while he possessed full testamentary capacity. I also carefully organized our home video logs, which clearly depicted Grandpa Lyle articulating his personal wishes with complete clarity and emotional independence. When Floyd Finch received the formal legal notice warning his clients against continued public harassment, the slanderous social media posts were quietly taken down within hours. Standing in my kitchen that evening, watching my grandfather peacefully complete a wooden birdhouse at the dining table, I knew that we were fully prepared to face whatever fraudulent claims my parents brought into the courtroom. When the official court notice from the Jefferson County Probate Court arrived 2 weeks later, Floyd Finch had added a dangerous new document to their legal filing. Attached to the petition was a certified copy of an irrevocable power of attorney, allegedly signed by Grandpa Lyle 3 years earlier, granting my father complete control over all financial holdings and real estate assets. The document bore an official notary stamp alongside a signature that closely mimicked my grandfather's distinct handwriting, asserting that he had willingly transferred his future estate authority long before moving into my house. Floyd Finch used this document to argue that my current guardianship was legally invalid, demanding that the court immediately enforce the prior agreement and freeze the Heritage Bank trust account. Reading through the filed petition inside Verna Drake's conference room, the sheer audacity of my parents' scheme made my hands shake with anger as they were openly attempting to use a fraudulent document to strip my grandfather of his autonomy. Refusing to accept the validity of the filing, Verna Drake and I spent the following afternoon conducting a painstaking audit of Grandpa Lyle's archived medical records and historical family diaries. We spread out dozens of hospital bills, prescription receipts, and surgical logs across her desk, cross-referencing every single date mentioned in the notarized power of attorney. As Verna Drake examined the exact timestamp on the notary seal, she suddenly stopped and pointed to a glaring inconsistency that had completely escaped Floyd Finch's legal team. The document claimed to have been signed and notarized in person at a private notary office in downtown Louisville at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on October 14th, 3 years ago. However, our verified electronic health records told an entirely different story, uncovering a catastrophic flaw in my parents' forged evidence. On that exact date and time, Grandpa Lyle was hospitalized over 100 miles away, lying in the intensive care unit at the University of Kentucky, Albert B. Chandler Hospital in Lexington following emergency open-heart surgery. Hospital admission logs, surgical consent forms, and attending physician notes conclusively proved that he was completely unconscious and intubated in a sterile ICU room for 5 consecutive days surrounding that date. It was physically impossible for him to have appeared before a notary public in Louisville, revealing that my father and Floyd Finch had manufactured a fraudulent document using a pre-dated notary stamp to fabricate a false legal paper trail. Recognizing that we possessed an undeniable medical alibi, Verna Drake immediately submitted an emergency evidentiary motion to expose the fabricated power of attorney before the probate judge. She attached certified ICU admission records, sworn affidavits from the cardiovascular surgical team, and an expert forensic handwriting analysis demonstrating clear signs of mechanical signature simulation. Furthermore, she formally notified the Kentucky Secretary of State's Notary Commissions Division to initiate a criminal fraud investigation into the notary public who had falsely validated the document. Standing on the courthouse steps as freezing winter air swept across Louisville, I felt an immense sense of relief knowing that my parents' greed had led them directly into an inescapable legal trap of their own making. The pre-trial mediation session was scheduled for a snowy Thursday morning at the Jefferson County Courthouse. Inside the stark fluorescent-lit conference room on the 4th floor, the atmosphere was suffocating as both legal teams sat on opposite sides of a long oak table. Vincent Vance sat with his arms crossed, projecting an arrogant indifference that betrayed no remorse for the fraudulent document his team had previously filed. Before the court-appointed mediator could even open the official folder, Vincent Vance leaned forward and issued a blunt, aggressive threat directly toward me. He declared that if I refused to surrender management of the trust and sign over the estate rights immediately, he would launch a targeted campaign to destroy my landscape architecture business by contacting all my major corporate clients. Floyd Finch remained silent beside him, offering a smirking nod that signaled full approval of his client's intimidation tactics. I sat perfectly still, holding my ground, without showing a hint of fear, knowing that their bravado was merely a desperate shield against the impending truth. Rather than engaging in a heated verbal argument, Verna Drake calmly opened her leather briefcase and pulled out an encrypted digital playback device. She looked directly across the table at Floyd Finch and informed the room that we had uncovered critical audio evidence during our routine review of Grandpa Lyle's archived digital files. A few months before moving into my home, Grandpa Lyle had inadvertently left a voice recording app running on his tablet while receiving an incoming phone call from Vincent Vance. Verna Drake pressed the play button, and a sharp, crystal-clear audio recording began echoing throughout the quiet conference room. The cold, callous voice of Vincent Vance filled the space as he spoke directly to the intake director of a notoriously low-cost substandard care facility on the outskirts of town. On the recording, he could be heard negotiating the absolute bare minimum service package for his own father while dismissing any concerns regarding basic medical care. His words were sharp and uncompromising as he clearly stated, "I do not care how terrible the living conditions are over there, as long as it is the cheapest rate available, and you make sure he never bothers me again." The room fell into an uncomfortable, heavy silence as the recording continued to play, capturing the full extent of his callous intent to abandon an elderly family member for pure financial gain. Floyd Finch's smug expression instantly vanished his face, draining of color as he realized the catastrophic impact this recording would have on his legal case before a probate judge. The sudden revelation of the tape shattered the fragile unity between my parents, triggering an immediate and chaotic meltdown across the table. Anita Vance turned toward Vincent Vance with wide, terrified eyes, her voice shaking violently as panic completely overtook her composure. She began yelling at him in front of both attorneys, loudly insisting that she had never agreed to put Grandpa Lyle into such a neglectful facility and accusing her husband of hiding the truth from her all along. Vincent Vance snapped back in a furious whisper, desperately attempting to silence her while slamming his fist onto the hardwood table. But the damage was already irreparable. The mediator quietly took notes on the emotional outburst, recognizing that their entire narrative of being loving, responsible guardians had been permanently destroyed in a matter of seconds. Verna Drake casually stopped the recording and placed a transcribed copy of the audio file onto the center of the conference table. She pointed out that this recording, combined with our verified medical evidence, established an undeniable pattern of bad faith, elder neglect, and attempted financial exploitation. Floyd Finch quickly leaned over to whisper urgently into Vincent Vance's ear, forcefully advising his client to abandon the petition before criminal charges were formally introduced into the proceedings. Looking at my parents as they continued to trade bitter accusations in hushed, panicked tones, I felt a deep sense of closure and relief. The truth had finally dismantled their elaborate fortress of lies, proving that no amount of arrogance could hide the cruel reality of their actions. The official hearing at the Jefferson County Courthouse lasted less than 2 hours, but it completely transformed my life. Presiding Judge Rebecca Montgomery reviewed the conclusive medical evidence alongside the damning audio recording showing zero tolerance for the fraudulent scheme presented by the opposing counsel. In a decisive ruling, she officially dismissed my parents' petition with prejudice and permanently invalidated the forged power of attorney document. Furthermore, Judge Montgomery formally ordered an immediate referral of the entire evidentiary file to the Commonwealth's Attorney Office, initiating a criminal investigation into document forgery and attempted financial fraud against both Vincent Vance and Floyd Finch. The judge awarded me sole legal guardianship over Grandpa Lyle, granting full fiduciary and medical authority to ensure his safety and long-term well-being without any further interference. The immediate fallout of the court ruling shattered what remained of my parents' personal and professional lives. Once news of the official judicial inquiry leaked through regional legal publications, the corporate firm where Vincent Vance worked promptly terminated his executive position due to severe ethical violations. Facing crippling legal fees and mounting public disgrace, Anita Vance filed for divorce shortly after the hearing, desperately trying to shield her personal assets from her husband's spiraling financial liabilities. Both of them now face impending criminal indictments that could result in substantial prison sentences, serving as a harsh reminder that legal manipulation carries devastating real-world consequences. Their ruthless attempt to exploit a vulnerable family member ended up destroying the very status and wealth they had spent a lifetime trying to protect. Following the victory inside the courtroom, I helped Grandpa Lyle step out into the crisp, quiet snow falling gently over Louisville. Walking arm in arm away from the marble steps, he squeezed my hand gently, expressing a silent gratitude that meant more to me than any court decree ever could. We drove back to our warm home, leaving behind the bitter conflicts and deceit that had cast a long shadow over our lives for months. I permanently changed my phone number, updated all personal security settings, and severed every remaining line of communication with Vincent Vance and Anita Vance. In our quiet living room filled with soft lamplight, Grandpa Lyle and I finally settled into a peaceful routine, surrounded by safety, unconditional respect, and true family warmth. Looking back on this grueling journey, the greatest lesson I learned is that true family is built on respect, integrity, and genuine protection, rather than shared bloodlines. Wealth and social standing mean nothing when they are pursued through deceit, and standing up for the vulnerable is always worth the sacrifice. Justice may sometimes feel slow, but truth inevitably prevails when supported by unwavering courage. Thank you so much to everyone who followed this emotional journey to the very end. Your steady support and thoughtful attention throughout this story have meant the world to me. If this story touched your heart or made you reflect on family values, please share your thoughts and perspectives in the comments below.